And a very good evening to you, and welcome to Politics 101. David Hines here, our midweek edition. Tonight, we are going to continue that discussion we started last night. Those of you who were on last night would know that we had Leland Saul, Richard Burke, and Lincoln Lewis. They were on last evening talking about that initiative they took in putting together that petition that they have sent to the Vice President of the United States of America, the Secretary of State, other elected officials. They have also sent it to leaders in the Caribbean and in Africa and some international agencies. And they walked us through that process. And tonight we are going to have Nigel Hughes, no stranger to this program, no stranger to the Guyanese political landscape. And he, as you all would have known, would have caught on by now, did some research and has come out with a paper that he calls Economy and Justice in Guyana. Economy and Justice in Guyana. We are going to be discussing that tonight with Nigel Hughes. And of course, when you have Nigel, you try to squeeze in as much as you can. But the bulk of our discussion would be that publication. You would have noticed that there are some comments in the media, one today by one Professor Randolph Prasad, who works for the government now, it seems. He had worked in the office of the president before during the Jack Dio period, and he's back. And he's their intellectual spin doctor. And he today said that if Mr. Hughes found these things, he should go to the court. They have been calling for the evidence. Where is the evidence? These guys were talking about the United States. Where's the evidence? Where is the evidence? Where's the data? Well, you know, they know that the government has the data. And they know that the government is not going to release those data to detractors. So they were so confident that no data would be forthcoming. Where's the data? And now the data has been forthcoming. The evidence is forthcoming. And they are already starting to do what rogue governments do. They are looking for a way out. Oh, well, if you all come up with this evidence, go to court. Well, if there is evidence that 10 contracts were given and none of the 10 contracts, or one contract was given to African Guyanese, what are we going to court to do? Why are you telling us to go to the court? Why not say, well, okay, now that you've got the evidence, let's fix it. Let's go to the court. Well, the courts are there for all of us. The court has the constitutional power to review the acts of the executive and the legislative branch. Judicial review, a very important plank, not only of jurisprudence, an important plank of the larger political and constitutional architecture of a society. The power of the courts to review the actions of the co-branches of government, meaning the executive and the legislature. But we're not there yet. You ask for the evidence, and the evidence is forthcoming. Evidence is forthcoming. We're going to talk with Nigel about that. Please share the link. Please share the link. Please share the link. Let everyone know that we are on Politics 101. We, of course, are launching today our year-end support drive. You know, we don't come to you every day. Our year-end support drive. Those of you who've been supporting our program throughout the year, thank you very much continuously. But for those of you who are who have not been doing so, we have our year-end support drive. The information there is on the screen. The information there is on the screen. We want to expand next year a podcast to this live cast. We want to do a Politics 101 podcast. And of course, we continue to broadcast our programs on Broadcast TV, Channel 9. So yes, please support our program. This is our year-end drive. We call it the year-end support drive. We'll talk more about some plans we have to expand our programming next year. But please share the link. Father Malcolm Rodriguez, those of you who missed us last night, Jesuit priest, human rights activist, trade unionist, academic, school teacher, political activist, and I would say the person who, or one of the persons, but certainly is a leading person who brought liberation theology to Guyana. Liberation theology, which developed mostly in Latin America among Latin American clergy, in particular the Roman Catholic clergy in Latin America. Father Malcolm Rodriguez was one of those who was most responsible for bringing that ideology to Guyana. It's liberation theology is really about the church witnessing in an active way for justice, not witnessing on the pulpit alone, but going into the communities and witnessing for justice, for fair share, economic equality, political equality, standing with the poor and the powerless. Father Malcolm Rodriguez, for those of you who are younger, would not know his enormous contribution, but those of a certain age group will remember him. But as we do on this program, we want to share the knowledge and information for all, including those who are the salt of the earth today, the younger people. Father Rodriguez will be buried on Monday, 10 o'clock at the Brigham Cathedral. The funeral service will be there, and you don't have to know him personally. You're a young person. If you have a couple of hours, go and join those who would assemble for the funeral. Of course, it would be broadcasted on these platforms, and CAMS TV will certainly be carrying the funeral service live for those of us who are not able to be there because we are out of the country at the moment. Father Malcolm Rodriguez, Jesuit priest, died a couple of days ago. He should be around 80 years or so. He was the contemporary of Walter Rodney. In fact, he was the one that accompanied Walter's wife to identify the body when Walter was murdered. They were very, very. So, share the link. Politics 101 is here, and Nigel Hughes is here and ready to go. some of you are already here and you're um, offering your comments. Lynette, you're too bad. Watching from the University of Haifa. Let's bring in lots of you emailed me today to talk about last night when we were on fire and to say you're looking forward to today's program. Thank you very much. Nigel, good evening.
Good evening, David. Always a pleasure to be on your program. Thank you very much for what you continue to do for our republic. Good to be here.
And
It's been a
thank
while.
you very much. Thank you very much for your contribution. I was in a meeting today, and we were talking about lawyers and representation of those who are on the front lines. And we were trying to find a list of 10 lawyers who we can call upon on this matter. Your name came up as one, and some of my colleagues in that meeting argues the one and only. You know, I was reminding the meeting that in my time as a young activist, I had two lawyers, the late indomitable Peter Britton
Uh-huh.
and Benji Gibson.
Yep.
And both
Yep.
of
Yep.
them, and they represented me in every little thing and big thing we had before the courts. And both of them always told me later on, now you're famous, never ever forget to tell Guyana that I was your lawyer. That's all they want. And certainly you are part of that long tradition of public defense of those who are the victims of oppression, but also those who are on the front lines battling against oppression. Thank you very much.
You're very gracious, but I don't know if you'd allow me to mention two names from that era too. You had Moses Bagwan, who was very active at the time, and I remember Dude Not Singh. He was very active. I think he represented Walter along with Small from Jamaica when they were charged with the fire, the national. I can't even remember what they call it. The Ministry of Natural
The Ministry of National Development.
National Development Ministry, right? Yeah. So there've been quite a few. I'm just honored to walk in their footsteps. I think the circumstances have put me here. My mother always used to say, those that have been given a lot owe a lot to the society. So this is my way of.
Thank you, my brother. B.O. Adams and Lloyd Joseph are some of the names that I remember from those who would represent you free of charge. You didn't even have to ask. I just mentioned Moses because, of course, Moses was in the WPA and so on. Is is in the WPA, my colleague. And he started the program by mentioning Father Malcolm Rodriguez. You were educated by the Catholics because you went to St. Stanislaus, a school that I so wanted to go to, and I sat on an entrance, and I just wasn't good enough to go in, to get in to St. Stanislaus. But you would have known Father Rodriguez. Any reflection?
Father Rodriguez was a fantastic human being. I don't want to use too many superlatives, but he was an exceptional human being. I had the privilege of being taught by him. We were the last batch that the Jesuits were still at the school, and Malcolm taught chemistry and occasionally maths, but he was an exceptional human being. I've not seen anybody that has been as fearless as Malcolm. In terms of the fight for human rights throughout the ages. He's probably been one of the most consistent fighters for not only human rights, but for a better day. And I think what made Malcolm even more special was the fact that Malcolm was of us. He was Guyanese. He became a Jesuit. He was dedicated not only to his where he found himself with the Jesuits, but he also demonstrated consistently without fail very high moral standards, uh, unswerving commitment to a better Guyana, and his bravery was second to none. I thank him for what he has done, and I think it was a privilege, certainly for me, to have lived in his time.
And there you have it from someone who would have benefited from Father Rodriguez as a student, and later on as someone himself who found himself on the front line for justice. Nigel, I am part of the Boston First of August movement, and every year we commemorate emancipation, but given our own socialization in that village, we do not concentrate just on the history and the culture. We concentrate on the here and now and the public education. And we have always had either a symposium, a lecture, something of that nature. We have, in the last decade or so, in our tribute to Brother U.C. Guyana, named it the UC Guyana Emancipation Lecture Series. And I know over the last decade you have been to our village almost every year. That, the little children just do not know the name Nigel Hughes, but they know the person Nigel Hughes because you're there every year. And we try to do the democratic way when we decide who we're inviting. And my colleagues always shout at me and say, when you call Nigel name, why are you asking for food? And so you were there in 2018 when Clive Thomas unveiled what is now known as the Buxton Proposal, the cash grant. You were there before, you were there every year. And one of the things that you kept hammering is that we have to move beyond the rhetoric. We have to move beyond what we feel as African Guyanese, and to back our case up with data, with data, with data. Only this past August, you were there giving the feature address on the 31st, and you came back to that issue of data, data, data. And it never occurred to any of us to say, well, Nigel, why don't you spearhead this sort of a date? And the only reason we have never done so is because you are so busy doing other things. And we always think this data thing is for economists. But here it is, as busy as you have done some research and you've given us some preliminary findings. And you've called it economy and justice in Guyana. And when you sent it to me about a week ago, I didn't open it right away because I find myself to be so busy these days. And as soon as I got to it and read it through, I contact you and say, Nigel, we have to come on the program and discuss it. So first of all, Nigel, for our audience, what pushed you in this direction?
Actually, David, here is where I get an opportunity to place the blame and responsibility squarely on your shoulders. You were kind enough to have invited me the 1st of August this year to address, it was the 31st of July, actually, going into the 1st of August, to address the good people of Buxton. And in that address, I spoke about these things, the transfer of wealth and what had to be done, that we must have data to support our cause. Not because we don't know that there's discrimination. Of course, we live it, we feel it every day, we see it, we perceive it. But of course, to advance the persuasion of others about that, we have to provide data. And after I had given that address, I noticed several people saying, well, where's the data? This is people from the government, of course. And I thought, well, if you feel that you need data, absolutely no problem, because we don't want to have a rhetorical discussion. And I did say we don't need a rhetorical discussion. So I started to gather the data with the intention of releasing it at an appropriate forum. What happened was the assault on Ipadagy came upon us out of the blue. I mean, a vicious assault in Ipadagy. And so what I was planning to release a little later, was occasioned by the fact that the Ipajaji was assaulted in such a brutal way. When they lost two night schools for adult education, I thought something has got to be really wrong if you are going to shut down the funding which you've agreed to give, which is part of the system. And I got a little delayed there. Of course, as you know, we filed legal proceedings on behalf of Ipajaji, but it presented an opportunity for me to actually start the preliminary data. What I've actually done is that there is a team of young people at universities, not in Guyana, and I wouldn't disclose where they are, who have, and this is Ivy League universities, who have volunteered their services to further analyze the data that we provide. So once we harvest the data and send it to them, far more important than the content of what I've done here, which appears to be dramatic, but the impact of this constant transfer of resources to one community, what it means for education for a child, what it means for health, what it means for lack of opportunity for African children. That sort of analysis we're going to come. Now, the report that I've done does not include forestry, for example, huge area in which there similar practices have been discovered, and gold. If you look at the people that own the gold, a lot of the large, medium, and other mining permits, it same pattern emerges. And what is even more important, and this is probably from a class analysis, is important. It is not all the Indian people in the country who are benefiting from this. It is an exceedingly small, less than probably 5%. And we're going to bring this information out in due course, maybe about 40 to 50 families who are the same families that continue to dominate other sectors. So it's not as if, this is a wholesale transfer to the entire Indian population. This is to an extreme, very small, very elite, and very privileged group of families who persistently benefit from the positive acts, discriminatory acts, which result in them getting contracts, getting, quarry licenses, getting export licenses for gold, for owning most of the gold claims, and all the other areas, provision of pharmaceuticals to the government. And so a lot of that analysis is going to come out over the next few months. And this is analysis done by people who are in the business of analyzing that information. So the purpose is not just to publicize this information, because we're going to certainly share it and discuss it, but it is also for presentation at the international fora, several of them, whether at the United Nations, whether at other places, that demonstrate exactly what is happening in Guyana as a result of a systemic transfer of assets and deprivation as a consequence of opportunities to part of the population. You will remember, David, back in the days of apartheid, whether you were a student in London, I was in London at the time, or in the US or what have you, there was a campaign where you forced people to stop doing business with South Africa. So Barclays, for example, there was a big campaign against Barclays. There was a
Yeah.
big campaign against buying South African fruit during the winter months where they didn't produce them in the Western world. And it is not just to bring this to the attention of the international world, but it is also to go to the next step. If you continue to facilitate this sort of economic transfer, then you are in effect assisting in the oppression of a certain sector of the community, or sectors, because the indigenous community is far worse off. And so that is where this we hope that this goes, with a view to making sure that enough pressure is brought to bear, and that people who elect to do business with the government understand the system that they are supporting. So it's not just, oh, we bring the information. Equally important is that, certainly, my responsibility, I think, as a citizen of Guyana, is to go out to those communities, all of them, to share this information so that they understand what is happening. Because when you transfer 2, 3, 4 billion dollars to one community that by and large will probably employ its own people, what happens is that the other communities who are deprived, they don't get employment, they can't make a profit, they can't build the kind of housing they need. And so when somebody runs in and says, oh, I can change your roof, here's $250,000, you are so grateful because your back is against the wall economically, and you don't realize that if this had been more evenly distributed, you would have had 4 or 5 houses with good roofs. So you wouldn't have to be happy because somebody came in and said, oh, I can fix your roof, or here's $250,000. So they have to understand how the structure has placed them in a position of great deprivation so that they're grateful when you give them anything.
Nigel Hughes here on Politics 101. Welcome all of you, whether you're joining from Barbados, as Isola is, or you're joining us from the wider Caribbean. Our Caribbean, we are part of the Caribbean. I always stress that. That is why I don't describe Barbados and Jamaica and Trinidad as any diaspora. It's our Caribbean. We are integrally part of the Caribbean. And so, therefore, welcome you from our wider Caribbean. Those of you who are joining us from North America, from Europe, welcome to Politics 101 Big Show. Tonight, Nigel Hughes is here. We continue this theme of inequality in the distribution of resources. You heard Nigel use the word systemic. So it's not just only about people sitting down and say, this is how we're going to divvy up the thing. There is a way in which the institutions of our country have evolved in this context of inequality. So there is that. But then there are agendas, political agendas, partisan agendas, ethnic agendas. And when you fold the agendas into a system that is hospitable to those agendas of inequality, or as Henry Jeff would say, the agendas of domination, and you fold those agendas into this hospitable institutional arrangement and systemic arrangement. You know, the institutions, when you put them together, they become the system. So we move from the institutional, people with these agendas, organizations with agendas, whether those agendas are class agendas or ethnic agendas, are there. And that is what we are addressing as we now let's get to the document. You say at the beginning, the Ministry of Housing is one of the ministries tasked with assigning and awarding government contracts. Then you say these contracts are locally funded through budgetary allocation and are awarded by the government of Guyana. And then you go into what you call the three largest projects by this Ministry of Housing through the Central Housing and Planning Authority. And you examine those three large projects, how much they cost, and who has gotten the contracts. Over to you.
Well, David, all the information, I don't know if you have the ability to put up parts of the PowerPoint, but all the information in that publication came from public sources where the information was published and available. And I just want to touch, for the benefit of your listeners, the three largest projects for roads. And they are: one, the Schooner Crane Road Project, which is $11 billion. The Mandela Eccles 4-lane project, which is $2.3 billion. And then you have the Eccles Diamond project, four-lane, that's $13.3 billion. So let's go to the Schooner project. And this just, I just picked the top four persons who were awarded on this. You have Guy America Construction, 2,651,774. You have a company called LaHurst Construction Services Inc. This is perhaps the most interesting company here. Just to mention, of course, Guy America is an Indian Guyanese company. LaHurst Construction, which got a $2.146 billion contract on the schooner to Crane Road, has never built a road before in its entire existence. And it gets $2.146 billion award. Now, this goes against the whole suggestion that MPTAB would have gone through this. How does a company that has no history in road building win 2.146 billion? And then you have Avinash Contracting and Scrap Metal. They got $992 million worth of contract, again, Indian company. And VR Construction, again, Indian Guyanese. Guy America Construction, no history of road construction. So, and this is just on the schooner to Crane Road project. When you come to the Mandela Eccles 4-lane project, you've got Guy America, again, Indian Guyanese company, 555 million. Mitsul Construcciones Limited, a Brazilian Indian joint venture, 364 million. And you've got Puran Brothers, another Indian Guyanese company, $360 billion on that project. When you come to number 4 on the Mandela Eccles, you see for the first time the appearance of African Guyanese contractors, Colin Talbert and Aaron Lal. So it's not even entirely African Guyanese, but they only have $256 million awarded. And then you go to Aramco, Trinidadian Indian company, $471 million in that contract. And GS Guyana, Indian Trinidadian company, $352 million. So it is apparent, and that was the second. When you go to the Eccles Great Diamond Bypass, a $13.3 billion contract, and this is the breakdown of the awards. S. Jagmohan and Sons, 1.2 billion Indian Guyanese. China Railway, First Group, Chinese company, 1 billion. And then in number 3, you have an African Guyanese, Ivor Allen, with $825 million. So when you look at that, particularly where contracts that are over $1 billion are awarded to persons who have had no prior history in road construction, you begin to see, or I think it's a little bit more than begin, you understand exactly what is happening in the economy and how systemic it is to transfer. And this is just road. I'm sure we're going to touch on some of the others because the most egregious is the oil and gas. We'll get to that, I'm sure. But it just in the construction of roads, that the largest road contracts that have been awarded, you see what happens there. And in the figures that we came up, out of 27.1 billion, 17% went to African Guyanese. That's it. And that's on the road. I'm sure we're going to come to the others, and I'll wait for you to say when you wish me to address the other parts, because it gets worse as we go forward. David, I'm not sure if you're still there, because I'm not seeing you. I don't know if I got bumped out. Oh, here you come.
Yes, I'm here. I'm here. Yes, and 82.5%
went to
of those 3 big contracts went to either Indian Guyanese or foreign Guyanese or international. Let's go to the next, and that is the Ministry of Health and the procurement of drugs and equipment. From August 2020, when the government this present government came into power, to 2022, and the total capital expenditure, $19.1 billion. What you found there?
Right. So this is just unbelievable. $19.1 billion total capital expenditure. Only two companies got that 19.1. GPC, new GPC, $13 billion. GPC, as you know, is an Indian Guyanese company. They got 68.45% of the total capital expenditure on the procurement of drugs and equipment. The other company,
Wow.
and only two companies, was Western Scientific Company Limited, who got 5.1 billion, and that is an Indian Trinidadian company. So two companies alone get the entire capital expenditure budget, 19.1 billion. New GPC gets 68.4%, and Western Scientific get 27. Both are Indian companies. There's nobody else
Wow.
in running in that. If you just begin to understand what is happening there, you get a very, very clear picture of what is happening.
Wow. What did you find in the water treatment tanks and supplies? GWI, $6 billion.
Right. So I'll give you the top 8 persons uh, in random order. Compass Industrial Service, new. I'm not sure of the ethnicity of the company. They got 425 million. H. North and Sons, Indian, of course, 593 million. DNR Construction, Indian company, 278 million. Sorry. DAX Engineering, $2 billion Indian. International Import and Supplies, 352 million Indian. Singh and Sons, 424 million Indian. S. Jagmohan and Company, 1.2 billion Indian Guyanese, and Toshiba Water Solutions, an American company, 633 million. That's There's not a single African person or African company or African entity in those 8 positions that I have just shared with you. None.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Nigel.
Okay, so I want to really share
You,
the one on oil because this is the future of this country for the next 25 years minimum. The officially, and it's about to get revised, the reserves, the discoveries are at 11 billion. That's officially. Unofficially, it is anywhere from 18 to 20 billion barrels of oil sitting down offshore Guyana in one block. We haven't even begun to discuss what might be discovered in other blocks. That's what's offshore. Key to the exploitation of that oil, insofar as the nationals are concerned, are a couple of things. One, the shore base. And the shore base is where you ship everything on that you go out to supply and to support the oil rig. So that is key. Everything has to pass through a shore base. And the other is the allocation of the blocks. So let's go back to the allocation of the blocks. I noticed that I think it's Randy Singh or Prasad, said in his letter today,
Randy Prasad. Yes.
Randy Prasad, said in his letter today that you have MPTAB, and MPTAB reviews these contracts. The offshore blocks that were allocated in this country under Donald Ramotar went, apart from the internationals, went to Indian Guyanese alone. Not a single, not one, David, not one offshore block. Nothing has been given to an African. But more egregious, it is not a case where they invited or advertised for persons to tender for the oil block. And then you could say, well, no African Guyanese had the funds or had the wherewithal to be able to bid for the block. Never happened. So it never went up for tender. So the opportunity to be able to bid for a block was never afforded anybody in Guyana. Well, clearly, if you want to bid for a block, what happens is people go and enter into joint ventures. You know, if Nigel Hughes wants to enter into a joint venture with Petrobras to bid for a contract, I can do that. And so if Petrobras says Mr. Hughes bid 120 billion, no problem. That didn't happen. It never ever was offered. And what happened was this was just allocated. These blocks were allocated to Indian Guyanese, just like that, allocated. The APNU government, AFC government came in and didn't want to follow that practice because there is one block that is remaining that is unallocated, which is Block C. They suspect it has considerable reserves. And Block C, there were applications put forward by various organizations that, given the imbalance, then at least you should award Block C to an African entity. Didn't happen. And so what we have is that the Indian Guyanese who actually got some of those blocks, he was able to trade them for millions of US dollars, entered into joint venture agreements with other companies, made millions of US dollars based on the exercise of discretion of who the head of state was at the time. Now, I come to shore bases. Like I said, shore bases are the lifeblood of the oil industry. The FPSOs, which are the floating production storage offshore offtake, platforms, which people commonly refer to as the oil rigs, are offshore. Guyana has had the most aggressive development in the oil industry on the planet, not in the Caribbean, not in the Americas, on the planet. Exxon, as you know, in the last quarter, Q3, the US president, commenting on their profits, said they made more money than God. And good for them. They took the risk, they invested, and they did it. Now, to support the platforms offshore, and they have online to come in the next 3-4 years, at least 7 or 8 platforms. All of those have to be supported by what you call shore bases. So the shore bases, it's almost as if you're printing money. You don't have to worry about it. You're printing money. We have one operational now, Gisby. The next 2 shore bases are awarded to Indian Guyanese. We have the across the river at Vredenhoop, which is the Indian Portuguese conglomerate that said somewhere between $200 to $600 million it will cost to establish it, and Crown Mining down the river, Demerara, just south of Timeri. So that means that the economic resources and the profits that will be generated from the shore bases will go to Indian Guyanese entities, and consequently, the future flow of revenues in this country in the oil industry is going to one sector of the community, one set of people. And this is not as a result of the invitation for bids or advertisement. This is pure exercise of the award of a license or permit exercised by whoever the appropriate minister is. That is scary because what it means is that the oil resources of this country and the profits that will be generated from them will go essentially to one community. Let's talk a little bit about the Local Content Act. The Local Content Act says this: 4 important things. You got to incorporate a company in Guyana. 51% of the company has to be owned by a Guyanese. 75% of the management has to be Guyanese, and 90% of the labor force has to be Guyanese. Let's go to the ownership. You have heard repeatedly the ministers and other persons saying publicly, we don't want any sham Guyanese going up. We're against these contracts where sham Guyanese go up and say they own, etc., etc. And one of the companies took them to court, and the government lost. But here's the important thing. There is no business in the oil industry in which it is likely to win contracts to provide support to either the tier 1 companies or Exxon itself that's going to be under $10 million investment US. Let's say even $5 million US. So if 51% of the company has to be owned by a Guyanese, it means 51% of that $10 million has to be put up by a Guyanese investor. That no American company, no company, not American, is going to come and give a Guyanese 51% because you're Guyanese. It doesn't happen that way. So you either have to fund 51%, or you have to, or you have to be able to secure the basis by which you're going to fund it, whether you borrow. No, 5 million US dollars. You tell me how many people in this country of any race can afford 5 million US dollars? And of those who can find 5 million US dollars, how many of them are going to be anything other than India? So even the Local Content Act in its present format, where they are so hostile against Guyanese who they claim are just going to be rent-a-Guyanese, what they're in effect saying, unless you are rich enough as a Guyanese to be able to purchase and acquire 51% in a multi-million US dollar contract, you can't participate. And even if they say, go onto the open market and borrow, because that's the only way you're going to do it. If you can't raise the 5 million or whatever it is, if it's a 6 million project, it's 3 million, you have to go onto the open market and borrow. So that means you have to go to a bank in Guyana to borrow. Let's work 200 to 1. 3 times 2, let's say 3 million. That is 600 million Guyana dollars. You got to have an asset that's going to be at least close to twice the value before the bank will even lend you $600 million. But more importantly, the bank don't take the risk. The bank says you got to find 10%, 15% of that. Which Guyanese is going to go and do that? Except those who are extremely financially well endowed. And so one has to understand this whole scheme for what is going on here. This is clearly by legislation saying only rich people can participate. Because where else are you going to be able to afford 51% equity in any company providing services to the oil industry? Where? So it sounds good. Oh, we're reserving it for the Guyanese. We're doing well. But what they're saying is only rich Guyanese can do it. And what they're saying is, look, if you decide you are going to sign up a contract and lend your nationality, so to speak, to the foreign investor, then we are going to prosecute you, or that company is not going to get the permit. And that is really a legal framework for excluding people who don't have the means, which invariably means Guyanese. Because I don't know of any international company in this industry that is going to donate 51% merely because of your nationality. Not happening. It is frightening. If you just think of
Nigel Hughes here this evening.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. Nigel, you saying it there that it's frightening. And it's, as some of you are saying here, it's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot. Being saying over and over again, because as Nigel said at the beginning of the program, if you're Afghanis, you know it. Nobody has to tell you. You know it. You feel it. You see it in your communities. But for it now to be translated into the actual data, it still stuns you the extent to which the inequality, and this is government, private sector, and we have not even begun. Some of you are asking about agriculture. We've not even gotten there. We are talking here just about government contracts in a few areas. I want us to digest this information because we are now going to be armed with the facts. They've been daring us all the time to come with the facts. Well, now we need to get the facts. We are beginning to get the facts. Nigel, gold export.
Oh, yes.
license. The license
Oh,
to export gold. It's another liquid area. Over to you.
ah, David, this is, well, this is even worse. Let me, in 2021,
I
well,
find
let
it
me just
depressing.
give,
I,
yeah,
I really find.
let me just give you a context.
Go ahead.
To, 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 to export gold out of Guyana, you got to get a license. Gold, as you know, is such a
Yes.
important commodity to the global, not only financial markets. Gold is now trading quite high. It used to be very low. And the ability to export gold is very jealously guarded. In 2021, they issued 11 licenses to export gold from Guyana. 9 of those licenses were issued to Indian Guyanese, and two, 18% went to African Guyanese. Now, you might have thought that people might be embarrassed by that. When you come to 2022, 6 licenses were issued, and only one of the 6, 16%, went to an African Guyanese. Only one of 6 licenses to export. So just think of what happens to that natural resource, in whose hands it is, who manages it, who has the power to export it, who has the power to hold the reserves and the gold out of Guyana. If you look at the numbers on the production announced annually by the Gold Board, staggering numbers of millions of US dollars. And the only 16% of the 6 licenses issued this year was issued to an African Guyanese. Now, the licenses don't go through MPTAB. The licenses don't go through MPTAB. You don't go to MPTAB and say, oh, by the way, how many licenses should we issue? This is purely a matter of the executive making a decision and saying, look, we giving 5 to Indian people and 1 to an African person. So the story is clear. I mean, how else do you justify in a country like Guyana, where the export license is issued to only 16% or only 1 Guyanese of African descent? Unbelievable.
There you have it. You all know I like talk, but I mean I want you all to digest this information because I'm digesting it here that we are getting tonight. I keep repeating. We always knew. Next, me and Ogun Sedong for saying that 90% of the wealth in Guyana, 10% of the wealth in Guyana, it goes to African Guyanese. We feel it, we know some figures here and there, but you make the calculation for yourself. In 1 out of 6 contracts, license for gold. It means when it comes to extracting wealth from gold, export, we're out of it. 1 out of 6. That's
David,
about 90% to me.
you will remember, you may remember after I spoke after on your kind invitation, after I spoke at Buxton, I think Agunse actually got up and said, we don't need numbers, we don't need data. We know it. But I think data is important because then you have a basis upon which we can begin a discussion. So if the government accepts this as accurate, that this information is accurate, then we have a basis. They can come and say, well, it's not discrimination, it's historic, whatever. But at least you have a basis for beginning to have a discussion if you are interested in the country. How those who are affected by it have a responsibility to bring this to the attention of other persons, because we know that in the National Assembly in Guyana is a complete and utter waste of time. Nothing gets debated, nothing gets discussed, and people vote straight down the party line. So, taking this information to debate it in the National Assembly, could do it for formality, but it's going to be an absolute waste of time. This information has to be further documented, further expanded upon, and taken, like I said at the start of the program, to those fora so people are aware not only of what is happening in Guyana, but that when they empower and engage in business with the persons who are in government practicing this kind of discrimination, what they are doing, and therefore should be called out for it. So there may well come a time where there's going to be a significant call for a suspension of doing business with Guyana because of the consequences of the policies that are in place. Um, Bit like what we had to do back in the 80s in South Africa with the campaign. Uh,
Yeah,
you cannot continue to support a system that is systematically, methodically excluding a significant part. Well, it shouldn't exclude any part of the population, and we haven't even begun to come to discuss what happens to the indigenous people and the
that's
prospects for
right.
their children. We haven't even gone there. It's as if it's a given that they are in no man's land.
And recently, in making this argument that you African Guyanese who are talking about poverty, look at the Amerindians, 70 something percent poverty. They're not ashamed to even say that. So in order to push back against Africa, don't worry with you 40 something percent poverty. Look at the Amerindians. None of us, no group, no group in the presence of the wealth that we are beginning to accumulate in Guyana. None of us, neither Indian Guyanese or African Guyanese or Amerindian Guyanese, any group should not be experiencing those levels of poverty. Something is wrong. Nigel, another area
Can I? Can I?
yes, go ahead.
I was going to say, and I do this purely for comparison purposes, comparative purposes. There was no government and no uh, in the apartheid era that had an army that was as powerful as South Africa on the African continent. There was no army on the sub-Saharan continent of Africa that had an army that was as powerful as the white apartheid army in South Africa. They used to invade Zimbabwe, Angola. They go in there and kill people. And it wasn't until the Cubans came that they started to retreat. There was no economy in sub-Saharan Africa during apartheid that was as powerful as the South Africans. There, the South Africans enjoyed at the height of apartheid the support of America. Mr. Reagan was the president, and they enjoyed at the same time the support of Mrs. Thatcher, who was in power in the UK. Despite the strongest army, the strongest economy, and the support of the most powerful Western allies, apartheid was brought to its knees. It wasn't brought to its knees because Mr. Mandela was sitting down in Robben Island, though that had moral suasion. You have to ask yourself, why was apartheid dismantled? It wasn't because the white people suddenly had their moment of realization that this was an unjust system. It was because it was no longer sustainable, and the price of maintaining it put too many was just too high. Let me put it that way. There's nothing different that happened in South Africa that happens in any other country in this world where there is an unjust system. There comes a time where the population decides enough is enough. If you go back a decade earlier, the Shah of Iran had the most powerful army in the Middle East. He was probably the wealthiest person, certainly in the top 10 in the world. He was provided with the latest military equipment. And a man sat down in France, in Paris, and created a revolution that overthrew the most powerful man in the Middle East and left the shambles that we have there now. I say that to understand that you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand where Guyana is going to end up. I don't wish it for Guyana. I'm sure many people don't wish it for Guyana, but that is the history of the examples we have throughout the world. I just wanted to put that in context because people feel after a while that because you have money and you have power, you are impervious. History demonstrates time and time again that is quite the contrary. To come back, I know you were going to invite me to look at another area, and I wanted to look at the area of quarry licenses. And just to put this in
Yes.
context, all the development in Guyana that you are going to see for the next 10 to 15 years, including the building of roads, new hotels that have to go up, new skyscrapers that get built, bridges, access to roads to Lethem, roads to Brazil, roads to Region 7, Region 8. All of those need two basic commodities: sand and stone. Cement, of course. Sand and stone. Guyana has no shortage of either. We are blessed, completely blessed. A matter of fact, I think a significant part of our country is sand. And what is important is, of course, the persons who are granted the licenses to actually have stone quarries, or they can exploit the sand. So if you have a license for a quarry, you're printing money, because just if you look at the contracts that I mentioned, the Vredenhoop, sorry, not Vredenhoop, the Schooner, the Eccles Mandela, and all those roads, all of those need a hell of a lot of sand, a hell of a lot of stone, and of course cement. I am just going to share with you the persons who have been awarded quarry licenses. Black Jaguar Investment Group, Indian Guyanese. Vishwan Baichen, Indian Guyanese. They are 4 awards to Hades World, Indian Guyanese. Metallica, that's a African Guyanese. We have RMC Silica, which is African Guyanese. And then we have Southern Canton International Trading Inc., which is Mr. Su of some considerable fame, Chinese. York Investment, I'm not sure who they are. Lorenzo Afonso, Portuguese. Mahendra Udit, Indian. Pradeep Abdul, Indian. Malali Quarry, Indian. Guangzhou and Jaiping, Chinese. Tri-Country Inc., Indian. Barakara Quarries, very old company, Indian Guyanese. They were there since the 50s and 60s. BK Quarries, Indian. Two to BK Quarries. Tosi Prasad, been in the industry for a long time, Indian Guyanese. And Prabhudial Ramdial, Indian Guyanese. Just, I mean, I can go over that list again. So these persons, 22,
Out of
22,
22,
22. It's
one.
Metallica. I was unaware, but Metallica is African Guyanese. So out of the 22, you have two that are African Guyanese. Two out of the 22. Out of 22 quarry licenses, two are African Guyanese, and I just want to give you that percentage so that you have it. Two, that's 9%. 9% of the quarry licenses, which will drive the development of this country across the board. Every hotel that has to be built, every road that has to be built, every highway, 4-lane highway, road to Lethem, road to, and you build roads to where your resources are. So the roads to Peruni, the roads in the Northwest, the roads all over the country. 9% of those quarry licenses are in the hands of African Guyanese. Just think about the billions of dollars. Don't even go to 5 years. Just think about the next year. The amount of sand and stone that will be sold and distributed, and which community the money from that goes to. And then when we get the analysis from the research people, they will tell you how that translates. So when you come and say, oh, your roof bad, let me fix your roof, here is $250,000. You, the individual, even if you had been employed by a company, an African Guyanese company, and you were just a laborer, you would not have been in the position where your roof would have needed changing and that you would be so impoverished that you're begging for $250,000. So this game here is unbelievable.
Sisters and brothers, Nigel Hughes here tonight, taking us to a new level. You see, when the president comes into your community and gives you $50,000, you hear the billions of dollars. We're talking about $50,000 here, you know. And we're not even talking about the 250,000 that sugar workers get.
Yeah, but here, $50,000, and we can get a little work cleaning the drain. Whereas if
That's
you
right.
had been employed and the employment practices were fair, you would have been able to get a job that was decent, would have paid you well, and you would have been in a lot better position than unemployed and grateful to take any job.
You all hear the amount of money and where these monies are going? Good evening to all of you who have joined us on Politics 101 tonight. You've heard it here. You've heard it here. Those numbers. And we're going to find a way to get those numbers in one place so that you all can get them and see them. Politics 101 will ensure that we're able to put all of these things in one place and get them to you because you need them. They're staggering. Even for somebody like myself who knew a little bit of the data and who understands the systemic nature of the distributive system. Even for me, it's stunning. It's stunning. You were talking about 10%, 5%, and then when you go to the actual breakdown, 6 license, 1 African Guyanese. What kind of equity is that? So we are equal citizens, but the wealth is not being distributed equitably. No, we know, given the nature of our society, and Nigel mentioned this, that when these monies get into the hands of the private sector, the assumption is that the private sector will then use that to generate employment and so on and so forth. And because of the divisive nature of our society, of course, the trickle down will happen in the ethnic community that the money is awarded to via contracts and licenses and so. So the accumulated at the top by the non-African elites, economic elites. But insofar as the money is trickling down, given the compartmentalization of our society along ethnic lines, one then has to conclude that even at the trickle-down level, African Guyanese are going to be deprived. This is stunning, it's depressing, and we know they accuse us when we do stuff like this of fomenting conflict, of, inciting people because we give you the facts, the FACTS. Nigel, another area that you delved into. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Before we go into other areas, just look at the trucks coming down the East Bank bringing sand. The other day we went to the airport, we counted between 2 and 4 o'clock in the morning, maybe 50 trucks. I can't think of more than 1 or maybe 2 of those trucks that was actually owned by an African Guyanese. And that's moving the sand from the licensed quarry owners to the places in where the construction is taking place. So here's the real rub, because you hear the numbers and you're staggered, but here's the real rub. Let's be modest. of every $1 billion contract, let's say 25 or 30% is profit. That means out of every $1 billion that somebody is awarded, $250 million is profit, right? Let's say you take the first 50 million or 100 million and you salt that away overseas, because that's what happened. You park that in some safe economy, you put it in US dollars or whatever, stocks or whatever you do with it. You then go and buy equipment that will allow you to continue to win contracts. So when they publish and they say Empatab says, okay, road contract to build Diamond to Temeri, you have to have 10 dozers, so many excavators, Barber Green machine, etc. You already got $150 million that you could buy that equipment. And so when you bid, you already have the equipment. David Hines, even if he take the little piece of land that his mother left for him and go to the bank, first thing he got is he has to pay interest at 12% if he can borrow the money that will allow him to buy the equipment. That's the first thing. Two, he got to have operating capital. So he's going to have to borrow the money plus borrow enough for operating capital, even if he has the land to justify it. Now, one of the most successful African businessmen in this country posted on Facebook, and I can say this because I'm going after what he said on Facebook. He also happens to be a friend of mine. We were in school together. Terence Campbell said, when he goes to the bank, he gets less favorable rates of interest on loans than those who are not African. Terence Campbell said that. So if you borrow in $1 billion at 12%, and your competitors are borrowing at 8 and 9%, they are already 4% on $1 billion ahead of you on an annual basis. So you cannot even begin to compete because you'll get slaughtered when you come to deliver on the project. Just think, this is Terence Campbell. This is not some little vendor selling sweetie outside some school. Terence Campbell, one of the most successful businessmen, said that there is a disparity between loans that he applies for as an African Guyanese and loans that other people apply for. That's Terence Campbell with assets and who's got a long, successful career. Not even the Bankers Association sought to dispute what he said. But let's just translate that into real dollars and cents. How are you going to compete? And you can't say that because it goes out to tender from Empatab, that somehow the playing field is level because everybody could bid. It doesn't work that way. You have empowered companies that, look at the company I referred to, LaHurst. No history in road construction, none, gets a $1.2 billion contract. If 30% of that is profit, he already is what, close to $300 million, smiling, buy more equipment. So the next time they have a contract, they're smiling. And that's how you perpetuate this permanent cycle of underdevelopment in one community. And like I said, the obvious is going to happen at some stage. I really hope. We are too small. We can't get over that if and when it happens. The society in Guyana is small. You're not talking about Mexico City with 20 million people. You're talking about a very small society where everybody knows everybody else. And so we got some real problems.
Nigel Hughes here tonight on Politics 101 on the theme Economy and Justice in Guyana. Economy and Justice. In the 1970s, Clive Thomas did a small booklet that was called Bread and Justice. Bread and Justice. Do you remember that little document?
Of course. Yeah. I used to run behind Clive in the AFC and the WPA in the days as a little student, but we're all fascinated with the aura of the WPA.
Yeah, yes. Bread and Justice. Who would have thought 50 years later, a little boy who was running behind Clive Thomas would be engaging now as a big man, the same issue. economy and justice in Guyana. Sisters and brothers, ladies and gentlemen, I know, I know, I know, I know, I know, I know, I know. I too, me too, stunned by this. There's a letter in today's papers, Nigel, by one Randolph Prasad, who works out of the office of the president, saying, addressing your findings. And he says to you, well, if that is so, go to the court. What do you make of that? Use a court man to begin.
No.
So I suppose he's telling you, don't babble in economics, go to the court.
My mother always insisted that even in the face of the grossest provocation, you have to be decent in your response and measured in your response. My issue is not about going to the court. I mean, that is an area in which I operate, and I have no doubt that at the appropriate time, when the information is gathered, we will consider that as an option. Would you in apartheid South Africa go to the court to say what is obvious? This here is not about going to the court to get a declaration. I'm not here in an attempt to persuade Mr. Prasad about what the facts disclose. This is not Nigel Hughes' position. These are what the facts say. Mr. Prasad did not say the facts are wrong or what I published is inaccurate. He merely said, empatab, and go to the court. So, assuming that what I have published is accurate information, his response is, that's okay. And if you're vexed, go to the court. So, in other words, what I have published is not good enough for him to even consider as evidence that there is something drastically wrong. What he's saying is, go to the court. It's like saying to a mother who just watched her son, or better yet, let's take a real example. Orrin Boston shot in his house, lying down naked next to his wife. You shoot you and kill you and tell you, go to the court. Really? Shaka Blair shot, murdered, killed in front of his children. You vex? Go to the court. But we all know what happened afterwards. So this is not about me going to the court to prove what to whom. And to tie something up in the court for decades? No, this is not, he misses the purpose of this information. This information is not for him to say, oh, go to the court and get a declaration that the government is, as if the government would react if you got a court decision. I mean, if the government doesn't react in the face of evidence that is uncontrovertible, why do you think there's going to be any different approach when you get a court decision? That's not the objective of this at all. And if he thought that was the objective, I'm sorry, Mr. Dr. Prasad, that's not the objective.
That's not the objective. Nigel, is this picture that you've begun, because this is only the beginning, as you've pointed out during the course of the program. This is not the beginning and the end. This is just the beginning of this investigative research that is being done to bring out the actual quantitative aspect of our case. Because we've always been very good at making the qualitative case. We have not always matched it with the quantitative case, largely because the custodians of the kind of information that has been brought to bear here tonight by Mr. Hughes is really in the government domain. The government, these figures are government figures. Let's understand that. They know. Their researchers must have told them this is what the figures look like. Yet they were telling us, go get the data. So one, they're very clear that we were never going to be able to get hold of the data. Everybody says, Guyana is one of the worst places to get information, especially this kind of information from. So they were either confident that they were going to hide that information. Second, they are obviously contemptuous of us. To say, well, the information is there, and you all go and get it. And even if you all get it, so what? Even if you all get it, so what? But as Mr. User said here tonight, there are consequences to this kind of stuff. We live in a volatile society. None of us should want our society to get to the point of disintegration. I was a little boy in the 70s when Walter Rodney talked about Guyana becoming possibly another Haiti. You all know Haiti is there, just on the brink. It's existing just on the brink. Every day there's something, either the hurricane or earthquake, and all these things are linked to the political economy because they've worked that soil in Haiti. If you ever go there, mudslides, because you're talking about 400 years of work in that place. So when we look at the effect of an earthquake on Haiti, if you remember, there was an earthquake, I think, in Chile at the same time, of same magnitude or even higher, but the effect was less on Chile. I think it's Chile and not Argentina, but I think it's Chile. Was less because Chile had the infrastructure in order to prevent that. Haiti doesn't have. So there are linkages. And I used to hear Walter Rodney talk about us slipping there and so forth. Nigel, is this thing sustainable?
Here's the gamble that is being made. Because the revenues from oil are so much, what you're seeing is you hope that you can buy off the obvious anger at the discrepancy and disproportion between those that have and those that you can go and give. So the strategy appears to be that you can go into communities where people are heavily impoverished, don't get the big picture, and give them handouts. And because they've never had handouts, because we've never had these revenues before, they are going to become loyal to you and understand that you are their savior. So you go in, I can build you a new roof, I build you a new road, here's $250,000. I come in next week and another $250,000. Never mind that you can't get a job to sustain yourself. Never mind that your ability to be able to sustain your family is eroded and you now become addicted. It's a bit like a drug pusher. The first shot you get from cocaine is the best high you will ever get in your life. And what happens is you keep taking more cocaine, hoping that you can get that high, and it never happens. So you're going, you get to 250,000. They come back around Christmas when you know people want to be able to change the curtains and etc. And you give them 8%, 10%, whatever increase, and nobody is going to pay attention to the magnitude of revenues that you are taking for yourself. So the strategy seems to be that look, everybody can be purchased. Sadly, I don't think this has worked elsewhere, but I think that's the strategy. And then you say, one Guyana, look, we're happy. Don't everybody's going to have a play a role in the future, etc., etc. But the real information and the real transfer of wealth, you're not seeing. So I don't think it's going to work. I'm sorry, I don't think it's going to work because Guyana's history consistently is we vote race. That's it. I'm not saying it's good. I ain't saying it's bad. It's a fact of life since before 1966 or 64. Sorry, we've been voting race. Whatever your views are on the People's National Congress, they have consistently got 42% of the population. So I don't think that changed it for just now. We're going down the road of race. So we first have to be like an alcoholic, say, we have a population that votes race. Don't comment on it, don't criticize it, accept it. What is the next step for governance of the country? Because if we look at here, there, and everywhere where we have had parallel situations in ethnically bifurcated countries, the prognosis is not good. So let's at least accept. It's like if I go into a discussion with you, David, and I don't like you, I start out by saying, David, I like you, but we got to live together in the same house. So let's work out when we can use the bathroom, when we can use the restroom, when we can use the kitchen, and what condition we can leave it in after we finish. Because we got to come back home after work and live in the same house. I don't have to like you, but it doesn't mean that we cannot find a common ground upon which we are going to deal with this common space and the allocation of resources. And that discussion is
Nigeria,
now taking place.
Nigel Hughes here tonight. That discussion is now taking place. We usually don't interrupt our programming as we didn't do tonight. We don't come every day to you, but we have launched our year end support drive here tonight. Those of you who wish to contribute, and we urge in this season of giving that you reserve a little small piece for Politics 101 so that we can bring you this kind of information, this kind of analysis. The stuff is on the screen there. As we said, we want to do some new things in the new year. We want to expand our programming in the new year, and we would love you to support that. So please support our year-end support drive to keep Politics 101 expanding. And so we are able to bring the kind of information and analysis. We talk about social media these days. When we move beyond social media, we would like to see what we are doing here as new media, because this is not, what you heard here tonight is not social media gospel. It's not social media haranguing. It's not social media red meat. What you heard here tonight is something that is worthy of the traditional media. And it's because the traditional media really, for a number of reasons, the traditional media is not able to do this kind of programming that we have stepped in. We have stepped in to fill that void, because this kind of information should be from stations, or television stations, and so on and so forth. So we see this as new media, and we see what we do here as supplementing the traditional media. In some ways, pushing the traditional media, because that's part of their duty. So this is not social media gossip. This is not social media views up and carry on. This is responsible media work. We call it new media because we don't want to encroach on the turf of the traditional media. Nigel, use your closing thoughts.
Um, David, I can't name them, but I want to thank the people who have assisted me in gathering this data. I want to thank the people who have reached out to me and are willing to work with me in further analyses by the experts. I am a mere lawyer. They will take the data as we get it. This is going to be an ongoing study, and from time to time, information will be released. I want to thank you personally for affording us an opportunity to actually share this information um, with the public. Because I think people don't realize how stark it is, how absolutely stunning it is. I want to thank Ipadagy. They have afforded an opportunity also for this to be brought to the attention of other people globally. And I think what is, I think, certainly part of my responsibility as someone who has benefited from the good that Guyana has afforded me, my family, is that I'm going to go out to communities with this information so that they understand exactly what is happening, so that when the people come in and say, here's so much money, you never got it before, they have a context in which to look at it. So I thank you, David. I just allow me to say to you again, I thank you for your commitment, consistent commitment to broadening the discussion, educating the people, and ensuring that people appreciate exactly what is going on. I just want to repeat, as you said at the start, our deepest condolences to the family of Mr. Rodrigues, and that we celebrate the fact that he had a great life and he has made Guyana a better place than when he was here.
Thank you very much, Brother Nigel. And again, thank you for all that you do as part of our larger team of compassionate Guyanese who are concerned about our country. Like Nigel, I come from a place that didn't prepare me, not even giving me the expectation that one day I will be somewhere where I am today. Guyana has been good to me. I don't want to see Guyana destroyed, contrary to what some people believe. I have invested and suffered along the way for Guyana. And so I don't want to see Guyana destroyed. I want to see Guyana become that place. All four parents, whether they came from Africa, India, Portugal, or China, or Europe, that the place that they made their home be a place where the children and grandchildren can live in harmony and not in fear. All my work from a teenager to now is towards that end. Thank you very much, Brother Nigel. Thank you. And to your audience, I am always forever grateful to you. There can be no activist, no speaker, no orator without an audience. And it's for that reason that I ask you to keep supporting. Please make a generous donation to Politics 101. I think they have the Cash App there and the PayPal and the Cash App. The Cash App, I understand, is quite popular. Please make a generous donation at this Christmas time, the new year, to help us to expand our programming, to sustain our programming. Some of you have been doing so throughout the year. Those of you who do not have the capacity to do so, now is your time. So please make a contribution to Politics 101 so that we are able, first of all, to improve on what we are doing and then to expand. It doesn't matter how small it is. It doesn't matter how small it is. I remember when I first got into politics, public meetings, people would come and they would put whatever they have. And I remember those old ladies in would come and they would hand you a 50 cents, which was a lot of money back then in the 70s, and you $1. And as we say, one dirty bill down. So you don't have to wait until you have $100. Donate. Give what you could give. As I always say, we have this culture. We have this culture of contributing to our own. We don't always activate it. But hand wash hand, make hand come clean. What a program tonight. What a program tonight. The information tonight. We are now more empowered than we were 2 hours ago. Thanks to Brother Nigel Hughes. Thanks to Politics 101. So please support our program. We're going to stretch the drive through the season and remind you, and we'll end the drive at the end of the year so that we can best prepare ourselves. Tomorrow night, here the lineup. Amanza Walton, Roysdale Ford, Kemraj Ramchatan, here to talk about the tampering in the National Assembly the other night, passing those amendments to the Representation of the People's Act, muscling it through. The real intention when I look at that thing is not to reform the electoral system. The real intention is to deter good people from working for GCOM so that bad people can do what they want to do at GCOM. The comrades are going to be here tomorrow night. Again, a big show on Politics 101 and a reason why you must keep us on air, keep us on this platform. Rosedale Ford, Amanda, Walton Desir, and Kemrad Ramjatan. Tomorrow night, 6:30, we starting early so we can get a full hour and a half of discussion. I love you all. I love you all tremendously, immensely, because without you, there is no me. Good night.